Spark something uncommon this holiday with just the right gift from Uncommon Goods. The busy holiday season is starting to approach, and Uncommon Goods makes gift giving less stressful with incredible hand-picked gifts for everyone on your list, all in one spot. I actually got my partner a hummingbird feeder because he loves hummingbirds, and we have them come to our patio from time to time. It's also stunning. It looks like a piece of art made from hand-blown glass. I love buying items from Uncommon Goods because they are high quality, unique, and often handmade or made in the US. You're getting beautiful gifts and supporting artists and small independent businesses. Many of their handcrafted products are made in small batches, so shop now before they sell out this holiday season. To get 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/dateable. That's uncommongoods.com/dateable for 15% off. Don't miss out on this limited time offer. Uncommon Goods, we're all out of the ordinary.
Yes, we all know the quality of makeup and skincare products are important, but have you ever thought about how you apply them is even more important for results? Since 2019, Anissa Beauty has been leading the way in creating vegan and cruelty-free makeup and skincare brushes that are safe for your skin and the planet and are designed to optimize the application and absorption of skincare products. Their popular Pinnacle foundation brush has made such a big difference for me. I used to hate wearing foundation because it always felt so caked on, but with this brush, I can use so little product and it goes on flawlessly due to its patented triangular shape. Anissa Beauty's brushes deliver value and quality like no other. The same goes for their Pinnacle Skin Brush, which has completely changed how I apply skincare. I no longer use my hands to apply my products. Check out the Pinnacle Foundation Brush as well as several other amazing brushes at anissabeauty.com and get 30% off site-wide with the code DATEABLE. That's ANISA beauty.com. And don't forget to use the code DATEABLE. Hi, I'm Yue Xu.
And I'm Julie Kraftchick.
We're active daters turned dating insiders.
Here to dive into everything modern dating and relationships.
Welcome to Dateable. Hello, friends.
Welcome back to another episode of Dateable.
It's been a funky week, 2 weeks, few weeks. Days, hours, I don't even know.
Feels like a decade.
And we knew this would happen. I mean, even when, just a little like behind the scenes is our book was actually supposed to be released around this time of the year.
Yes.
And our publisher, very smart to push back the pub date to January because we didn't want to be outshined. I don't even know if it's outshined.
We're just cluttered, I think.
Yeah,
in
right.
the noise.
Yeah, to break through all this noise. And there's still so much noise floating around right now. But we know that a lot of you are feeling a lot of different emotions. We are as well.
Yeah.
Julie and I probably text every day about what are you feeling today? And it could change from day to day. But it is a wild, let's just like accept the fact that it is a wild, interesting, weird time right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's also like I feel different things because it's like national elections, local elections, different topics. Like there's topics on both sides that I feel very strongly about. Mm-hmm. There's a lot to take in right now, and it's okay to just not be okay. And Yue and I, obviously this isn't a political podcast, so there's some topics we're not going to touch. And then there are a lot that, come for women and just relationships. And clearly there was a huge gender divide on the way people voted. There was a lot of stuff about how the younger men really drove a lot of Trump's votes. And then women with all the abortion stuff. And this isn't across the board. There's obviously women that voted for Trump too.
A ton of them.
And men that voted for Kamala. So it wasn't like 100%, but if you're looking at stats, that's what it was showing. And you're seeing a lot of fallout. I've seen so many things on like TikTok of like, my boyfriend voted for Trump and we've had a great relationship, and now should I break up with him? And it's just, it's crazy, some of the fallout that's happening.
Yeah, I think it really shed some light on the reality of where we stand. It shows you that we exist in two different realities, but all living in the same world and being humans on Earth, but we see realities very different. For me, it was shocking to see how divided California is. I used to think California was a bubble. I was wrong. I think LA is
Yeah.
a bubble. I think SF is a bubble. Even if you go down to Long Beach, you're out of a bubble. This is very different. So that was quite the reality check for me. But I will be the first to admit, I'm not proud of this, but there was a moment that I looked at my partner, who's a white male, and I had a little bit of contention towards him. I was just like, I had a little blame. And then I snapped myself out of it and said, he did nothing to hurt me. In fact, he's extremely loving and supportive of me. It's not about him being a white male. And that's where I think we could get into really dangerous territory, is creating a greater divide between men and women. So I'm hoping, because I think this is a great opportunity now in this moment in time, is to shorten that distance between men and women. We can start having these conversations and be more open about these conversations instead of pointing fingers and then pushing people away, or seeing all these like the TikToks that we were talking about, like people protesting the other gender. Like, that's not the goal. The goal is to bring us closer together so we can work towards this like better world that we want.
So I actually saw a really good TikTok that Julia Mazar, who we've had on this podcast before, she hosts the podcast Pretty Much Done, and those are her TikTok, Instagram handles as well. And she was saying that she actually could find the silver lining in this, that she can actually be more discerning now who the right partner is. Instead of like swearing off all men and all of that, it was an opportunity to be like, okay, who shares the same values as me? Mm-hmm. And how do I go from there? And I think personally, this isn't what she said, but my take is like, we need to start thinking about values beyond like a two-party line too. Mm-hmm. I think that's what's gotten us to where we are.
Yeah, I think having hatred towards anybody doesn't really make it better, doesn't make anything better. We're already so divided as a nation. Do we want to be so divided as genders? It doesn't help us in any way. And seeing, I mean, it's heartbreaking to see some of the movement from South Korea that came in. It was like called the 4B movement. Women are protesting men, sexual relationships or romantic relationships, and even giving them attention. And I just think, like, isn't that similar to what the incel movement was doing, protesting women? And what did that do?
Yeah.
Nothing. It just created a bigger divide and making people feel more hopeless. Like, this is our chance to really like welcome people in. Let's just have those conversations. And I agree with what Julia's saying. It's like, it's a great time to be discerning, because you'll know right away if someone shares your same beliefs and values.
I mean, I've definitely seen people say like, I'm on sex strikes because of like abortion stuff. And I get that. You don't want to necessarily trust anyone with your body. Like there is some merit to that, but we also don't want this to be like a further reason not to like date, especially if you are in a hetero relationship. We don't want this to be another reason that's pushing us into a love crisis.
I know. What I get so scared about is, I know some of you are listening to this and thinking, why aren't you guys more angry? You should be more angry. You should be outraged. I think we have to find a path forward, and we have to find a path forward that benefits everybody, that we still want a better life for ourselves. We still want a better future for ourselves. How are we going to get there if we're just blaming and withholding? It's like when you stonewall your partner in a relationship, in a fight, where does that get you? Nowhere. You're just brewing more. So I hope that we can turn this conversation, and the rest of our podcast too, is like the path forward.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I like to understand like people's perspectives. Like that's part of our podcast too, is understanding the various points of view. Fundamentally, I'm not sure if I like X for like what it is, because I think it's a very toxic place on the internet, but I do find it very fascinating because, obviously Elon Musk is a very outspoken Trump supporter. Mm-hmm. And you get people in your feed that you don't follow, that just comes to you. And I actually think, unlike other social media, you're in an echo chamber of like your own beliefs. And I think it's super interesting to see what people feel and how they view the world. And maybe it's not aligned always with how I do, or maybe there are more common instances that I can see that, like, if you aren't seeing this, you're like, they're the enemy. It's the opposite. It's a good way to like understand more. So I like it for that reason.
Right. Understanding perspectives and not shutting people down just because they believe in something that's not within your value system, it's always good to hear. I mean, just like in dating, right? It's always good to hear where people are coming from, because then you understand why they are the way they are today.
Yeah. And I mean, for some people, you're like, I can get to a middle ground. And then in other times, you're like, I absolutely cannot. And I don't want to build my life with someone that has different values. And I think both are fair. It really depends on your personal take on situations and how, you view the world and what you're willing to bring into your world. And everyone needs to make that call for themselves. But hopefully, this can make us more discerning, like Julia was mentioning too.
I know it can get a little bit difficult too, because there are multiple truths can exist at once. Like my friend was telling me her in-laws are amazing and they're so kind and gentle people and she really loves them. Yet the other truth is they believe in certain policies that she doesn't agree with. So she's like trying to understand both things can exist at once, and how do I make this still a peaceful household to have all of this, to be their reality but also my reality too.
Yeah. And then there might be instances where you're like, I absolutely want to be with someone that only subscribes to my belief system, especially when picking a partner, or other instances that you're like, actually, I can be more lenient and understand that there are two perspectives.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, well, hopefully this is a good segue to this episode, because we're really talking about just understanding human behavior and humans. And in the process, of course, we're looking at that through the lens of dating. And we were excited about this guest because it's a very different type of expert than we typically have on the show.
Yes, he is an espionage expert. His name is Jeremy Hurewitz, and he loves studying spies. He has a whole network of former CIA, FBI, and Special Forces operatives. He's a journalist, and he's written a book called Sell Like a Spy. Now, at first, you're like, sell like a spy? How does that transfer to dating? Well, it does, because it's all about understanding human behavior, relationships, communication styles through the lens of people who do this for a living. If you're a spy, your whole life depends on how you're able to read people.
This isn't going to be like hacky tactics and tricks and all that. Like, he actually gives a lot of like super quantifiable, interesting tidbits that, for anyone that wants to just read people better and look for like the verbal and nonverbal cues, and, you want to just build those better relational skills. Like, this is such a great episode that's going to give you so much insight.
Yeah. And then if you want to understand more about emotional intelligence too, like EQ, we just kind of throw around, but he really breaks it down, like how you can get better with your own emotional intelligence, but also read other people's EQ.
Yeah. And we're really like hitting the gamut of, reading people, understanding complex interactions, which we all know happens in dating quite often. And then how do you build trust with the people that you're dating? Because ultimately that's what is the foundation for relationships. So we're really hoping that you'll get out of this a deeper understanding of human behavior and the people we date.
And it's just fun because this guy studies spies for a living. Hello.
And also we go into like, how do you become aware of signs of deception and disinterest? So, you don't fall for red flags, but also we counter it with more of a balance that you're not like looking for that red flag in every situation. You could still enjoy dating and getting to know people.
Yeah, not everyone's out to deceive and scam you. So that's not what this episode is about. It's just gaining better understanding of other people so that we have more compassion and empathy towards them, but also understand some signs that we may have ignored in the past.
Yeah. And, I think for me, my idea of like spies completely changed from this. And at first we're like, how does this relate to dating and relationships? But like, he felt really strongly, his team felt strongly that he had a lot of valuable info to give. And after we did this conversation, we both walked away with like, wow, that was really insightful. Yeah. So we hope all of you take away a lot from this convo.
It's very valuable information. Get your pen and paper out, or notes app out. You're gonna want to take some notes.
Okay. Well, we're gonna get into it all with Jeremy, but before we do, quick announcements. @DATEABLE Podcast. That's where you find us on Instagram, TikTok, all the socials. Most importantly, though, we are getting down to a couple months before our book is launched. Just crazy. This is the next 3 months. And, we've said it before, but pre-orders really help us go out strong. And we are so excited to give you some gifts for your pre-orders that can help you now, because we also understand it's still 3 months out. So what can help you now, but also set your future self up for success? And, includes in this, we give away our modern dating survival guide, a guide to managing dating anxiety, and then also questions to ask within the first month of dating.
And these are resources we have never released before. So you are the first to get your hands on this. You cannot access them anywhere else but to pre-order. So take advantage of this opportunity because it's very much a limited time.
I want to read one comment we got because I just feel like this made me so happy to see this. But when we put up the post around these gifts, we had one of our dear community members, Julia. She goes, okay, I just ordered through Audible. That's also a good call out that you can get this on hardcover, Kindle, or audio. And then 10 minutes later, she comes back and she goes, okay, just got my extras, did a quick look over, and peeps, they are really good. Followed by a bunch of emojis. I'm really looking forward to this book, but these are so great right now. Exactly what I need.
Woohoo! So great to hear that.
So great to hear. howtobedateable.com. All you do, order. If you've already ordered 2, you are eligible for these. So go pick them up. Order, then you put your order number in, and then they're yours.
Yay!
Well, before we get into it with Jeremy, let's hear a message from our sponsors. This episode of Dateable is brought to you by Wild Grain. The holiday season is here, and it's time to start baking delicious homemade favorites with family and friends. Wild Grain is here to make you look like a baking expert without the stress. If you're not familiar with Wild Grain, it is the first Bake from Frozen subscription box for artisanal breads, pastries, and pastas. Wild Grain's boxes are fully customizable to your taste and dietary restriction. In addition to their classic variety box, they recently launched a new gluten-free box and plant-based box that's 100% vegan. Best of all their items bake from frozen in 25 minutes or less with no mess or cleanup. All the Wild Grain products were a huge hit in our house, but our favorites were the Belgian waffles, hand-cut fresh pasta, and the sourdough bread. And those croissants. Honestly, there wasn't one thing that we didn't absolutely love. I'm definitely going to be bringing those pumpkin cinnamon biscuits to Thanksgiving this year too. Everything feels so fresh and high quality. I really don't think people will even know that I didn't bake these from scratch. Impress your guests with minimal effort this holiday season. Wild Grain is offering our listeners $30 off their first box plus a free item in every box when you go to wildsgrain.com/dateable. You heard me. You now get $30 off your first customized box when you go to wildsgrain.com/dateable. So you can use your promo code DATEABLE at checkout.
I don't know if this is a superpower, but I sometimes dream in French. So I guess those 4 years of high school French classes are really paying off in my dreams. But you know what? I have more ambitious goals of actually speaking French in the waking world too. I remember how hard it was for me to learn a new language in the classroom. I just couldn't get past the basics of bonjour, je m'appelle, and au revoir when I tried to speak it out loud. However, Rosetta Stone has completely changed the way I learn foreign languages. As the most trusted language learning program available on desktop or on an app, Rosetta Stone truly immerses you in the language you want to learn. I find context-based learning to work best for me. And I also like that the program focuses on speaking and listening in that language without English translations. And having a lifetime membership gives you access to 25 languages. So I am well equipped for all my future trips and interactions and dreams. Don't put off learning that language. There's no better time than right now to get started. Dateable listeners can now get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership for 50% off. Visit rosettastone.com/today. That's 50% off unlimited access to 25 language courses for the rest of your life. Redeem your 50% off at rosettastone.com/today. Today.
Want to add some holiday cheer into the bedroom? Spice up your life using the natural power of cannabis with Via. We're obsessed with their best-selling High Love gummy that really intensifies any sexual experience. With its unique blend of pleasure-enhancing cannabinoids, libido-strengthening herbs, and a medium dose of THC, Via's really created one mind-blowing gummy. You can even get their High Love bundle either as an early present for yourself or a loved one. I personally like their THC-free gummies too. Their flow state is my fave because you guessed it, it puts me into that right focus. So whatever your threshold, they have you covered with the highest quality hemp sourced from trusted, independent-owned American farms. If you're 21 plus, head to viahemp.com and use the code DATEABLE to receive 15% off. That's VIIA hemp.com and use the code DATEABLE at checkout. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Take your passion and pleasure to a whole new level with High Love from Via Hemp. Okay, let's hear about decoding dating and human connection.
Isn't it funny that in modern dating, we're constantly trying to figure each other out? Like we're trying to solve these cases. I feel like it's Law and Order every day on a date because you're sitting across from someone, you're like reading their body language, trying to figure out their history. So instead of us amateurs trying to figure out the people we're dating, we thought, why don't we talk to a real life espionage expert who can show us how we can really evaluate people and understand what is going on these dates. So we want to welcome Jeremy to Dateable.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We are so excited to go into this. When we got this topic, we're like, this is very interesting. And I think, like Yue said, we're always trying to read between the lines and, analyze text messages. There's so much of that happens in dating. So having someone that can put this to good use is really powerful for us.
I am hoping that this leads to better love connections. So this is good stuff.
Oh, good. And we hope that this is kind of new for you, like relating the skills that you would have as a spy to dating. We hope this is like a lighter topic and fun to talk about.
It is. And I do a lot of interviews and I'm so excited for this one because I believe I hear about it from friends that are still single in my world and just generally about these things that happen. And I'm always thinking, boy, if they would only use some of the skills I talk about, train teams on and write about, I think people could be more successful at dating. So I think we should have a update a year from now and see if we've changed the world.
Oh, wow.
I love it. Okay, so you alluded to this. You typically work with people that aren't your average daters. What comes to mind is like terrorists, criminals, corrupt diplomats. Definitely a different tier than daters. How do you think all of this relates to dating and relationships?
There's a lot of different ways. And I think we'll get into the specifics of some of the things that I'm going to rattle off. But, you mentioned some nefarious characters. Spies have to connect with people they wouldn't automatically want to form a friendship with because of necessity. And born out of that are some really incredible skills because not only in dating, but just like everyday life, and maybe adjacent to dating, you meet your new boyfriend, girlfriend's mother. And you're like, oh my God, this is somebody I do not like, and she doesn't like me. How do I connect and influence this person? So there's relevancy there. And there's techniques like radical empathy, intellectual curiosity, vulnerability, which I hope we can talk about at greater length that help you build rapport. And then there's ways to teach better active listening because people are bad listeners, in particular men. And this is a terrible flaw that I've identified in dating, hearing from girlfriends of mine and, having dated in my past and talking to my buddies. And then there's skills like elicitation, where it might make more sense to get information about the person you're romantically interested in a more subtle way than asking questions on the nose. And these are all things that spies do. So there's quite a few relevant avenues we can discuss here to make dating more advantageous and successful.
Okay, but we can hear some people saying, okay, when I think of a spy, I think of someone who is very elusive, mysterious, secretive, untrustworthy, maybe someone who a double-cross spy or whatever. Like people go there. Can you just dispel some myths of spies and why we should be able to trust a spy with this sort of information and the skills we're about to learn?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that question, because I always feel like one of the best places to start with all of this is the misconceptions about spies. Because look, I enjoy probably more than the average person a good spy thriller, TV show, movie, or book, right? I'm a huge consumer of it.
Yeah.
But these are fantasies for the most part. I love the ones that are the most gritty and realistic, frankly. But, the world of James Bond or Jason Bourne, they're quasi superheroes. They drive Aston Martins. They're involved in seduction, gunfights, car chases. This is mostly not true of the world of espionage. I tell people spies are more like an elite relationship manager, or very often case officers, and that's what we call spies, CIA case officers, consider themselves closer to a therapist or a psychiatrist, because their agents oftentimes feel like they're the only one that they can talk to in that way, much in the same way that mirrors kind of romantic relationships and how a person becomes your best friend and your confidant. That's the agent relationship with the case officer. I use quotes from these intelligence professionals in my book and in my trainings. And my favorite is that every good intelligence officer has a real bond with their target on some level and in some regard. These are real connections that form. We can learn so much from spies if we take them out of the world of Hollywood and fantasy and put them on the more human level that they exist in, and get away from the idea of spies as nefarious characters. The CIA does not train its case officers to blackmail people. So, there's definitely been scandals, we know about post 9/11, these things happen, but the CIA doesn't train people to engage in coercion tactics. They train them to learn how to be elite at connecting with people, at building rapport. And that's why I think so many of these skills are transferable to everyday life and to dating.
100%. I mean, you started going into some of the skills, and when we were thinking about it, they kind of fell into like a couple, themes or buckets. And like some that came to mind for us were reading people, navigating complex interactions, and then building trust in relationships.
Sure.
Is there any other like more high level themes you can think of? And then of course we'll get into the nitty gritty specifics.
Diffusing difficult encounters, because we all deal with emotional partners sometimes. And I have a couple things to add there too. And then maybe on the nature of negotiation, because all relationships become kind of a negotiation. So
yes,
we can talk a little bit about that as well.
Awesome.
We're going to add to all of that. Let's start with the low-hanging fruit that everyone thinks about is reading people. We've done a lot of content on reading body language and listening to someone's tone of voice when they speak. What are some of the skills that we can apply to reading people through your work?
Sure. So a couple things about body language. Anybody who tells you that one gesture means one thing all the time is not correct. Human beings are extraordinarily complex, and, you cannot take one gesture and think he or she means this. So for instance, crossing your arms, people typically think, well, we can call that a blocking behavior, and I'll talk to you more about that. And it oftentimes is a blocking behavior. But, I was at a show the other night, some music, and I was just standing there and I was folding my arms. And I wasn't folding my arms because I was trying to block the music or I felt confrontational. It was just because that was a comfortable pose for me. So there's no such thing as one particular pose. What I tell everybody to do is first to try to establish a baseline. So you sit down with your date at dinner or at a bar. What are they like? Do they blink a lot? Are they sweaty? Are they disheveled? Are they nervous? Are they using a lot of body language, or are they calm? Once you can establish a baseline, giving it a few minutes to sort of say, what are they like? Then you can see when they deviate based on you saying something, right? Oh. So you're talking to your date, and let's say you bring up children, and all of a sudden they start rubbing their neck. You and your audience should look up soothing gestures, licking your lips, rubbing your legs. There's a variety of them. When there's a deviation from the baseline that you've seen them establish based on something you've said or done, then you know what that might mean. Because again, like on its own, rubbing your neck just might mean you have an itch there. But if I say, oh man, I can't wait to have 7 children, and the other person rubbing their neck, that created anxiety. I'll talk to you about just 2 more things, blocking behaviors and territorial displays before we move on here. So blocking behaviors, crossing your arms could be, if someone responds to you when you say something and then they cross their arms, that should be a concern about it. If you're sitting at a table and it's just normal, you have your baseline, and you say something and someone puts their glass in front of them, anything that you put in front of yourself between the two of you in response to a stimuli means that person might be trying to create more distance, subconsciously or consciously. So note that. But conversely, to give it a positive spin in dating, if you sit down with your date and you're at a nice restaurant and the napkin is folded and there's glasses salt and pepper shakers, maybe a vase with some flowers in it, and they sit down and they move everything out of the way and put the napkin on their lap and they want a clear avenue in front of you, that's a positive sign that your date is very interested in engaging with you. It's an anti-blocking behavior. And then finally, I think territorial displays are kind of funny because people think it's just about the animal kingdom, even though we're human animals, I suppose. But if you're out at a restaurant with somebody, at a bar or whatever, and that person leans back and sprawls out, putting his or her arms on the chairs next to them, maybe puts their possessions on the table in front of them and, sprawls it out. That is, again, consciously or subconsciously trying to establish dominance and saying, this is my area and you're going to be subservient to my interests and what I'm trying to establish here. So those are things that you should read into to establish clues about it. And don't take any one thing as an ultimate meaning. Your goal to date like a spy here is to create a mosaic of intelligence to inform your decisions about whether they're fortunate enough to get another date from you.
I'm glad that you differentiated because I think a lot of body language, I remember just like looking at someone's like the way they're pointing their toes or something that just seems so like trivial and you're like the person could just be sitting at a weird angle. Like there's so many things.
That's another good point though. I'm glad you're bringing it up because the feet are oftentimes a real window into what someone is thinking. So if you are standing there talking to somebody and their feet are pointed away, that oftentimes really does mean that they don't want to be there. Or if you're having a meeting and the foot is pointed at the door, it's shifted in that way, that means they want things to end. So it's a good point, Julie.
So I guess though, maybe that's counter to my point. I guess like, what's the line of like over analyzing though? Because I feel like that's where I was going with it. But I know there is some merit to it because it always comes up. But like you can be on a date just looking at someone's feet and what direction they're going and drive yourself nuts. Like how do you like draw that line?
If you're having a great date and everything's going well, but they happen to be sitting in a way that kind of points their feet at the door, that's exactly to my first point that not one gesture means one thing every time. And you should just be collecting intelligence to sort of form a mosaic about this person. It's another data point.
Got it.
And we can talk about that with regards to detecting deception as well. No one's a human lie detector. These are just ways to collect information.
Got it.
You're saying set a baseline. Figure out what's normal, I guess, for what you're observing, and then detect anything that's abnormal. Doesn't mean that they're being suspicious or being negative. It's just like, oh, something about that topic aroused a different behavior in this person.
Exactly. Law enforcement officials will tell you they'll put like a rubber band or a water bottle next to a suspect or put them on a chair with wheels, and they'll note when they start fidgeting with the water bottle or rubber band or start rolling on the chair. It's all about what causes the behavior that we're talking about here.
So I absolutely can see this with my partner of 3.5 years. Like I know the second that he's getting uncomfortable, I can see it from knowing, but that took 3.5 years. Like what about, people that want that instant, because that's what we see on dates. They want to decipher these clues on the first date or through the text messages and figure out all the signs and decide if it's worth, pursuing someone. Are there ways to observe that early on, or do you really need that time to gather that intelligence?
I think you need the time and you need to put it, as I said, into the mosaic. So I just gave you guys some tips on body language. Hopefully by the end of this, we'll be able to talk about, or you and your listeners will be able to just sort of think about it in a broader context. Hey, I'm putting this through the ringer of body language, detecting deception, elicitation, active listening. What did I learn here? You can do what I train sales teams to do, which is like taking notes. It occurs to me that after a date, it doesn't sound very romantic, and especially if you've been out having a bunch of drinks or something, but, taking notes afterwards and trying to say, when I brought this up, he or she reacted this way. I don't think that's a bad thing to create a dossier and look for patterns in that.
There are apps out there like date trackers. So it's
really?
100% in line with that.
Man, I haven't dated in almost 14 years. So I've been married. It'll be 9 years in November. So this is interesting.
Well, yeah, we have all kinds of resources now. We just don't know how to use them. Honestly, there's too many resources. So we got to the nonverbal cues. What about some tonal cues? Verbal cues. What can we look for there?
What I can tell you about tone of voice, if you have to combine that with body language, and you can get a little bit more of a sense of how we listen. And I don't know if I can have one thing that'll tell you like, a tone of voice, if they're whispering, it means this or that. But the tone of voice and body language is really how we listen. Some studies have shown that up to 90% of comprehension in a conversation is about tone of voice and body language, and only 10% is actually the words. That's controversial and it varies, but I think most people agree that the majority of our comprehension is based on body language and tone of voice. And the analogy I always use is if you listen to a song, a pop song, say, and you maybe only know the chorus or a few lyrics, but you get the meaning and you have a feeling from it. That's exactly how conversation works. So that's how we are listening. What I can tell you about tone of voice, and this might get into diffusing difficult encounters, if someone is upset and they're yelling and they're talking really fast, the last thing you want to do if you're talking with your spouse, your partner, whatever it is, or anybody, is rise to that and start yelling as well and talking fast. Now, I can lose my temper, so I don't want to be hypocritical. This happens. But if you can train yourself like FBI hostage negotiators do to, not take the bait and stay in a slow, calm, and steady voice, people revert to the social mean that you're insisting on establishing. And you see this when you see groups of people speaking, and a lot of them are speaking in an animated fashion because they're all taking the cues from each other, So you can change the nature of a conversation by insisting on the tone and pace that you want to set.
Should we go into that then? Because in early dating, of course, you're going to come upon conflict and maybe you don't know how someone's temper is yet until something does happen. So if you do find that someone's raising their voice, you just gave us a great example of a great solution is keep a calm kind of tone of voice. Anything else?
Yeah, a couple other things. First of all, if that person walks into the room and you're sitting in your, living room and they're standing up and they're yelling, don't stand up. That will raise the temperature of the encounter. Remain seated. Invite that person to sit down, which tends to calm things as well. If they won't sit, don't take the bait and stand up. Let that person completely vent. It might be tempting if they're saying something that outrages you, that you think is wrong, that, let that person completely unburden themselves and don't contradict them, let them completely finish and then ask them, a clarification question so that they can go even further and say, this must have made you feel really rotten. Do you think that I could have handled it differently or something? And invite them to continue further. A couple other strategies. If you're talking to them, invite them to offer a solution. And if they're like, they're angry because they saw you with an ex and you say, well, what do you want me to do? And they say, I never want you to talk to that ex again. I want you to defriend them on social media and never talk to them. Then sit there for a minute and let that sit. And because they might realize how unreasonable they're being and just let it sit for a minute and don't even necessarily say no. Say, okay, I'm taking that in. And it's very difficult to do. You might thank them for, sharing these things with them, even if you're gritting your teeth and thinking how unreasonable you're being. And then finally, if you can't find resolution and you're trying all these strategies and you're starting to lose your temper as well, make sure you sort of call a timeout. One of the people in my book, he wrote a book, FBI hostage negotiator Gary Nessner, called Stalling for Time. A lot of the hostage negotiators take their time because emotions cool down.
Yeah.
Emotion trumps cognition. Your emotions take over. It's why when you get into an argument with somebody and later you think, man, I wish I'd said that. It's because your mind is choked with emotion and you don't think correctly. So if you can take someone's anger back and just kind of swallow it, let them vent and do all those strategies, you're more likely to have a positive outcome and not take the bait and start yelling at them as well.
What about in early dating when people just hold back when there's conflicts? Because there's the one side that you got to of just airing it out. And then there's the side of retreating and kind of cold shouldering. How do you deal with that? Or are there any tactics for that end?
I'm trying to think about the world of espionage and agents being cold shouldering. I'm not sure if I have a direct analogy there, but skills of elicitation could be helpful. If you think that someone is upset about something and asking someone very directly why they're upset is not responding to it, but you think you have an indication of it, bringing up that subject, that person, that situation in a slightly more roundabout way. And again, seeing where the deviation is, seeing how they respond. You might be able to elicit the reason why they're upset, even if they're not necessarily choosing to be forthcoming with you.
Okay. Well, I can see definitely in Julie's example of just people not giving you information. And the word they say, everything's fine.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong. What are you talking about? Everything's fine. And then that gets me frustrated just hearing that. That triggers me because I'm like, come on, tell me what's wrong. What's on your mind?
Yeah.
So what's a better way of doing that?
We might say in that case that someone is being somewhat deceptive. Would you agree?
Yeah. It's not necessarily like malicious deception.
Yeah, not
but
malicious.
I could see that.
Why don't we talk a little bit about detecting deception? Because I think it has parallels to someone avoiding the truth, right? And that's kind of how I teach it and talk about it, because a lot of former FBI types and CIA types go around the corporate world and talk about how they'll train their teams to be a human lie detector. And there's no human lie detectors. It doesn't work like that. Just like body language doesn't always mean one thing. Nobody can tell with a very high degree of certainty when someone's lying. What we can do is identify when someone is being somewhat deceptive, when they're shading the truth, when they're not being forthcoming. So there's a number of things. If you think your new relationship or whatever you have is not necessarily telling you the truth about something and you want to figure out why that is, you can ask a question and they might fail to answer the question. So, you might say like, why are you not answering me about this? And they'll say, well, I answered you yesterday. And you think, no, you didn't. And so that is a red flag about someone hiding something. Invoking oaths, like the classic mafia thing. I swear on the eyes of my children. Like if your partner or spouse is getting so dramatic, someone who is just being candid and truthful will typically just be calm and truthful about it. If someone is invoking oaths and swearing, I wasn't with that person, I swear to God, that's a little dramatic. It doesn't mean that they're not telling the truth, but you have to ask yourself, why are they being, so dramatic? Repeating the question. If you say, were you out last night with Jessica? And they go, was I out last night with Jessica? The human mind sometimes looks to buy time to find the right kind of answer. So repeating the question can be a strategy to sort of think, oh, shoot, how am I going to figure out a way to answer this question? So those are a couple of kind of ways to identify a red flag and to understand if someone is trying to avoid telling you the truth. And then you have to figure out ways to get further.
It's so interesting. I think this is, again, comes back to like balance, though, because one of the things we see in dating is that everyone's looking for every last red flag. And then the date just becomes miserable when you're only searching for red flags. And you also diminish actual red flags, the big things. How do you balance like taking this info into account, but also not going so deep that that's all you're looking for?
If you're on a mission to just find the problems, then you're just dating wrong, I think. And you're dating wrong, you're doing sales wrong, you're doing intelligence collection wrong, because we should be aware of red flags and we should be looking to assess the character of the individuals, but you're there to have a drink and have dinner and have a good time. So I know that people get scarred by dating and they worry about it too much, but that might be a little out of my lane specifically. But what I think, your listeners could benefit from is, these skills of connection, and radical empathy is a way that we look for the humanity in just about anybody and getting past, even if we don't have that initial rapport, trying to find that in somebody. Intellectual curiosity. If you're on a date with somebody, I don't like golf. And in like the business world, everyone's talking about golf and my eyes glaze over. But if I want to connect with that person, I need to ask some questions and I need to show my respect and my interest in what they're talking about. And then, perhaps most notably here, and I think relevant to dating is making yourself vulnerable. And that is a way to bridge an intimacy gap. And it's a really profound way that we connect. And I always share a very personal story, which I'll just quickly share with you guys. A little over a decade ago, I had a brain tumor. It was fortunately benign, but it led to me losing my hearing in my right side. And, like if you're walking on the street with me, I always keep you on my left. If we're like at a lunch spot and we're with a couple people and it's busy and loud and I've arrived later, I'm going to ask if I could swap seats with somebody so I could hear better. So this comes up, right? And a lot of times in my business life in particular, somebody has been kind of, cold to me or, it's a very formal setting. This comes up tactically and all of a sudden we draw closer because not everybody experiences tragedy, but we all understand misfortune. And when you share something like this with somebody, there's a very powerful side of behavioral science that is the desire to respond to things in kind. So if you're on a date and you want to get closer to your date, if you share something about yourself, they will typically respond in kind and draw closer to you. And if they don't, they might be kind of a sociopath. They might be an outlier because this is a really powerful tendency with people and it will, bridge that intimacy gap. So this is a way to do that. And then another thing we can talk about if you're interested is mirroring and as a way to build rapport as well. Because I don't want to be on here just as the guy talking about, how do you detect deception and all of that.
I want to go into that. I do have like a follow-up though on vulnerability before we go into that piece, because this is something we talk about all the time on the podcast and 100% be vulnerable. Brene Brown is shouting this from the rooftop, but I think people still are confused what that actually means in practice. Like I think in theory, it makes sense. We've heard like, what's the line of trauma dumping versus, being vulnerable? Outside of like the example you gave, which was a good one of sharing something that personally happened to you that didn't feel like trauma dumping, what are some other ways that you can be vulnerable in a sense that it doesn't necessarily cross a line on like a first date?
I don't have a specific playbook for you, I'm afraid, because every situation is going to be unique and every individual is going to be unique. I tend to be comfortable being vulnerable. I wear my heart on my sleeve, and that's just who I am. Other people are going to have a harder time opening up. And you have to, I think, do kind of baby steps about it. And you have to read the room. If you're on a first date with somebody and you're like, my uncle just died of cancer, that feels like trauma dumping, right? And that's not a good way to make yourself vulnerable. But it could be just something smaller. And, you arrive at the date and it's pouring rain out and you're like, my shoes are just soaked and I'm so wet. I feel so ridiculous. Something like that can be a very small way to bridge a certain gap, as opposed to you saying like, I'm great. The rain didn't faze me at all. I'm afraid that it's going to be very micro. And all of the tools that I talk about in my book and in my talks, I tell people, and I really feel strongly about this, you have to make them your own. This isn't kind of a playbook of you do X to get to Y. These are suggestions and ideas about how highly successful spies and, other members of elite government agencies do extraordinary things with just emotions and communications.
I really liked your example about the rain because I think we always think it needs to be some big thing.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about like what makes me not feel connected to someone. It's when it feels like they're not being real. They're not being honest, or they're like putting up this front of like, everything's okay, all is good, and it's not. So I like thinking about like what are some minor things too that we can relate on.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been a troubled sleeper for a lot of my life. And like, there's some days where I'm just like, I slept like crap last night. And I meet somebody and it helps me sort of, gives me an excuse in the conversation that might come, at the bar or restaurant if something slips or something. And it also opens myself up to somebody and say, hey, that's too bad. I slept poorly like 3 nights ago. There was like, a problem with my kid, or the cat woke me up in the middle of the night. I don't know. But again, it brings that human element into things. And, we're not looking for perfection in people. We forgive imperfections. We're looking for empathy.
Yeah.
We're looking for sympathy. We're looking for, ways to connect, and trying to strive for perfection is, I think, the wrong approach in just about everything.
I want to dive into this even more, but before we do, let's take a quick break to hear from our partners.
With the holiday season right around the corner, you bet I've already started thinking about gifts, especially easy gifting options. And I've discovered that the perfect gift is Osea's limited edition Super Glow Body Set. Now, this includes Osea's best-selling body care products packed in a beautiful box. So it includes a full-size Ondaria Algae Body Oil, their new Ondaria Algae Body Wash, which smells divine, and a travel-size hyaluronic body serum. And let me tell you, this is the ideal set of products for your everything shower. If you know, right? Every product leaves my skin feeling silky, soft, and unbelievably glowy. Give the gift of glow this holiday season with clean, clinically tested skincare from Osea. And right now, we have a special discount just for our listeners. Get 10% off your first order site-wide with the code DATEABLEPODCAST at OseaMalibu.com. That's 10% off your first order at OSEAMalibu.com using the code DATEABLEPODCAST.
November is one of my favorite months, with Thanksgiving around the corner, pumpkin spice lattes, and slipping into a cozy sweater from Quince. I already got my Mongolian cashmere sweater that's only $50, which I still can't get over how much of an absolute steal this is, because they partner directly with top factories and cut out the cost of the middleman, which passes the savings on to us. And it's not just the sweaters. It's all of Quince's items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. As we speak, my ultra stretch straight leg pants are being shipped, and I cannot wait to pair them with my sweater, because that sweater is so damn cozy, and if it was socially acceptable, I'd wear it every day. Get cozy in Quince's high quality wardrobe essentials. Go to quince.com/dateable for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/dateable to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/dateable. Do you like to be in the know of what's really happening with celebrity gossip? Do you like to hear about the drama happening on reality shows before the shows even air? If you're not listening to Cocktails and Gossip yet, the time is now. I'm obsessed with this podcast because each week, Bea and Amanda, the hosts of the podcast, bring you the tea on reality TV and the craziest celebrity blinds from their website, Bravos and Cocktails. You know, I've been on a real Bravo binge lately, so this podcast is the perfect complement. And trust us, they do not hold back. Listen and you'll have some unfiltered tea to spill at your next dinner party or in your group chat. Pop culture lovers, Bravo lovers, and people who just can't get enough gossip. This is a podcast you should definitely check out. And who knows, you might hear something from Cocktails and Gossip first before you hear it anywhere else. Scandival, anyone? Listen to the weekly Cocktails and Gossip podcast wherever you get your podcasts. So let's get into mirroring. I want to talk about that more.
Mirroring is used a lot in the business world, so a lot of my audiences know a lot about it. And your listeners will know that it's kind of the physical replication of another person's behavior. It's been shown over and over again in behavioral science studies that we have mirror neurons. And when we see somebody behaving similar to us, it creates a sense of sympathy, creates a sense of empathy and rapport. And it's a way to shortcut rapport building. So long story short, if your date is leaning forward on the table with their elbows on the table, smiling, you don't want to be leaning back, without a smile with your legs crossed. Mirror their behavior. My kind of spin on it is to include verbal mirroring. Verbal mirroring is a tool in the toolkit of FBI hostage negotiators. I've worked with quite a few of these individuals. I'm always excited to talk about the world of kidnap for ransom consulting, which is something I've done a good bit on. Nobody knows about it. It's really fascinating. These skills get used in that world, so I've learned a lot about it. And verbal mirroring is really important because if you're an FBI hostage negotiator and you arrive at a siege, you can't be in front of the person and mirror them, right? There's a distance. And your chief goal as that negotiator is to get that person to calm down. So they're using, if the person is upset, they're speaking slowly and calmly, and they're looking to really use many of the same words that that person is sharing with them, right? So using that back to them triggers those same mirroring neurons. And then look for really specifically colloquialisms or pet words. We all have these little things that we say, these verbal crutches. I have one friend who says, by the way, a lot in conversation. I have another, instead of saying yes, says 100%. When I speak to these guys, they're good buddies of mine. I already have rapport, but I practice my verbal mirroring chops with them by saying that back to them. Because that gets me to an important point here, which is use mirroring, physical mirroring and verbal mirroring on your friends and family for a little bit first and practice that. Because if your friend's like, what the heck are you doing right now? It could backfire on you on your date. If you're trying to mirror somebody and they're like, what are you doing? It looks like you're copying them or mocking them. That's exactly the opposite of what you're going for. So practice with your friends and family first. Make it a part of how you interact with people and then use it on dates, both of those things. And you'll find that it will augment the building of familiarity.
I think I need an example of verbal mirroring. I'm not sure if I completely understand it. Is it like, are you just repeating back what they say? Like, for example, if you and I are having a conversation, Jeremy, and I say, I had a really stressful morning because my washing machine broke down and I had to take my dog out for a walk. And it was just, I felt so frazzled.
Well, frazzled is a great word to focus on there. Say, if you said, yesterday I was feeling completely frazzled because, my neighbor's dog was barking so loud that, I'd forget getting my laundry done. I couldn't even, go to the kitchen without feeling like I had a headache. That might not be the most perfect example, but I've used a few of the words that they just used there, to use it back to them. But the example I just gave too of looking for the colloquialisms, maybe we should ask either one of you who probably know each other well, Julie, is there anything that Yue says a lot? And Yue, is there anything that Julie says a lot?
Oh, yeah.
And then when you're talking to each other, use that back to them. Like I said, the by the way or the 100%. In corporate life, there's a ton of these things, put a pin in it or blah, 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 these little words, right? So people on sales teams should look for that so the other side can feel like you're a part of their culture. But on a date, you want to be like, the person saying, oh, it was so rad. I went to that game, blah, blah, blah. They keep using that word or something. So you throw that back at them and use that as well.
So I've read a ton on this too, like how much it builds connection. So 100% on it. I think the one thing that always comes to my mind with mirroring, and I'm curious your take, is like, what again is the line of not coming off like feeling too calculated or feeling like inauthentic when you start like using someone else's words and you're not staying true to yourself? Like, how do you balance the two of using the technique, but then not going like so far the other way.
Yeah, take it easy. Don't overdo it.
Yeah.
I mentioned practicing a little bit. Start slow. And the easiest part of mirroring is you're sitting at a table with somebody, Are they leaning forward or are they sitting back? Do that. Are they speaking with a lot of hand gestures? As long as it's not entirely opposite of how you move through the world, start trying to subtly adopt that a little bit. You got to maintain who you are. So if you're a person who speaks with a ton of body language, but you're on a date with someone who sits still, maybe you want to reduce your body language, but sitting statue still would likely make you seem really awkward and you're not comfortable in yourself. So the first rule is to stay true to yourself and just try to engage in mirroring to the extent that it still feels comfortable. And you get comfortable by practicing this with friends and family a little bit more in low stakes environments where you can make a mistake, make a little bit of a fool of yourself, and it won't hurt you too much.
I mean, ultimately, what we're trying to do is establish presence. You want to be present with the person you're on a date with, which is also related to active listening. Let's go into that because it seems like they're all very much in the same family.
The first thing to understand with active listening is that it's really hard, okay? And there are natural impediments to active listening, and we can talk about that. But all of us listen with an intention to reply, not an intention to understand. The person that can put aside their ego, their intention to reply, and just really focus on being a great listener, I say that's the most important skill a spy could have, and they'll tell you that too. Because I ask audiences all the time, and I pause after I ask this, think about the greatest listener you've ever experienced. And I invite you both to do so. I bet someone is coming to mind, right? And I bet you have a quite positive feeling about that person because when we're listened to, we feel seen, we feel understood. And oftentimes someone will say you're a great conversationalist when really all you did was shut up and listen really well and ask some good clarification questions instead of, waiting to tell that witty reply or anecdote in response to what they're saying, right? But in terms of like the behavioral science and evolution, our comprehension of language, the way it developed was, we can refer to archaic man in early stages of evolution when man was on the savannah and they would, start saying clipped phrases to each other, but they were very brief so they could turn their attention back to the surroundings to see if there was something that they can kill and eat or something that wanted to kill and eat them. So we started to learn to understand things quickly and in short phrases. And it still affects our comprehension today. We comprehend things 4 times faster than our ability to speak. So when someone's talking to you, you often see their body language get impatient. And sometimes they'll even finish your sentence for you, right? Because they know where you're going with it before you can, finally shut up, right? Conversation is composed of 90% body language and tone of voice. And some people say only 10% the words, right? And so that varies. It's a very controversial thing, but it's more than half of our comprehension in a conversation is about body language and tone of voice. And the analogy I like to give when people find that strange is that like if you listen to a song and you might only know a few lyrics, maybe just the chorus, but you understand the emotional meaning of the song, right? The body language and tone of voice is the melody and the lyrics are the words. So that affects how we listen to things. So I tell people to try to summon their inner Bill Clinton. And, Bill Clinton is a little bit of a controversial guy. Not everybody likes him, but he is widely considered one of the greatest active listeners of his generation. And I have this whole thing I teach called Spies in Disguise, where we go into cover stories and putting on a disguise in order to sort of develop character archetypes that you can bring out in yourself, right? Because we all have these different sides of our personality. So I tell people sometimes, summon your inner Bill Clinton. Ask yourself how Bill Clinton would make your date right now seem like they're the only person in the room that matters. And if you're at a busy bar or restaurant, there's beautiful people moving about you, you got to really try to train yourself to make steady eye contact, not creepy, but steady eye contact with that person. Try to, again, put aside your desire to tell that witty reply. Remember it maybe for later, but ask clarification questions. Encourage them to talk. You'll learn more about the person and they will hold you in high regard as a great listener.
Wow. In our history of Dateable, I never thought we'd hear the words that you should bring Bill Clinton to your date.
Trying to subvert paradigms here.
Channel Bill Clinton.
I think this has been so helpful in understanding and reading people. I want to move on to our next, bucket that we're thinking about around navigating complex interactions. In dating, everyone thinks they have the most complex interactions, from decoding text messages to understanding if, someone says they want to see you again, but then they're giving you mixed signals. What are some ways that people could adapt some skills from spies to these situations?
Boy, I don't know if you're going to quite stump me there, but the reading of text messages is, I don't know if this is much of a skill in espionage. I'm a very candid person. To me, candor is a way to separate the wheat from the chaff, right? And I think it can get very hard in dating when you're, dancing around all these details. My wife, I think we built rapport right away because she responded to text messages and she was straightforward and I kind of knew where I stood and I valued that so much. I think people need to not put up with ambiguity for very long. I think if you are getting mixed signals from somebody, that is for a very good reason, and you can adopt some of the other strategies I mentioned if you're then meet in person. Are they failing to answer a question? Are they being somewhat deceptive? There's a phrase, the body reveals what the mind conceals. If sometimes somebody might say, yes, I agree with you about that, but they actually shake their head. So you got to pay attention to how body language, yes, I'd love to see you again, and their feet are pointed towards the door the entire 15 minutes at a date. So you need to, again, create that mosaic of information and not rely on one thing. But I think people get enthralled with somebody and they get dragged along for too long, hoping that what they know inside themselves to be true, that I'm getting mixed signals and this isn't, what I want it to be, is the case. And sometimes people really change their tune if you're like, you know what, I'm out. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden they go, hey, I was kind of juggling 3 people and I was mixed, but you're way better than the other 2 people I've been out with recently. And now all of a sudden they change. So you have to be bold and you have to be kind of fearless and believe in yourself, I think.
I think believing ourselves, I think that's where the challenge lies. We hear this from people, and I've been through this too. You think you know someone and you think they're a good person, and then you've come to find out that they've deceived you or they've done something to disappoint you. How do we navigate those feelings? Is it just that we need to get better at reading people, or is there like another way out?
I mean, I think first forgive yourself. People are complex. My favorite quote, Walt Whitman, do I contradict myself? Very well, then I contradict myself. I'm large. I contain multitudes. People have been deceived that have been in marriages for so many years. And not that I think, one time cheating on somebody, you guys are probably familiar with Dan Savage, who I deeply admire. And he talks about how, monogamy is the only thing you have to be perfect at for decades over time. Otherwise, you're a failure. And I think he's totally right. Sometimes people have moral failings and we should try to forgive. And these are ambiguous situations and you have to navigate them to the best of your ability. The analogy about, espionage being a murky world, I think is, also comparable as well. You have to try to find an ethical and moral compass in a world that doesn't always help you define that. And the more you can be, righteous with what you're trying to do and who you are, I think the better off you are, but that's easier said than done.
When I'm thinking about spies, I always think of them like blending into various environments. And we're not like advising that daters blend into their environment, but I think there is like a benefit of adaptability in dating. What's kind of your take on adaptability as a skill for a spy or something in that realm?
That's such a good question, Julie. And I talk about that at the beginning of my talks with misconceptions. And I think I disappoint a lot of people when I tell people that you're more likely to find a spy that resembles a frumpy academic than Daniel Craig, because we're selling this fantasy in these movies. But there's a joke in the world of espionage that spies are kind of medium everything, medium height, medium stature. Because think about it, if you're a spy at a diplomatic event, is it better to be, a heartthrob that everybody's tracking around the room and remembering and focused on? Or is it better to be someone who's a little bit more, in your words, adaptable, a little bit blander? And so many of the spies that I think were really good that I've worked with were, in terms of men, 5'7", average looking. Really, they don't alpha male you, and they sort of let you talk. A lot of them come from the Mormon community, if you can believe that. And the CIA recruits specifically from the Mormon communities because they're very patriotic. They have experience overseas on mission trips. They're easy to background check. And I've worked with a few. One I'm thinking of in particular that was a lapsed Mormon who was quiet and was so good at deferring to you and making you feel like you were so interesting. And he was self-deprecating, and he was a cunning operator who moved up the corporate chain very quickly.
Dang.
So being a little bit of a chameleon can be really helpful in dating. And that's where intellectual curiosity comes in. Being someone who's curious about the world, who only doesn't want to talk about 3 subjects, who can say, oh, wow, I don't know anything about car racing or hunting or something, tell me more about that. And trying to cultivate that intellectual curiosity will enrich your life and make you more adaptable and make you more popular amongst your, the rest of the people you interact with.
So it's interesting because we actually advise people not to become dating chameleons, like so that they don't blend in and they stand their own and don't just say like, oh yeah, I love indie music when you really love Taylor Swift or whatever. So what's the line and difference of having that curiosity, but also like sacrificing yourself?
Yeah. And there's a specific example that I write about and talk about. That one example in my book, a very notable CIA case officer was from a upper class background, big East Coast city, went to an Ivy League school, and at a training program at the farm where the CIA trains its case officers, was tasked with getting to know somebody with the opposite background, rural background, and kind of came from a lower class environment and is an avid hunter. This guy didn't know anything about hunting. And this is critical when it comes to the CIA. They will recruit somebody who is a nuclear scientist to go into a particular conference so they will have credibility. But if you have a CIA case officer that's just navigating that group, he or she won't pretend to know all about nuclear physics or hunting. They just have to be curious about it, okay? So I wouldn't want to say I'm a Taylor Swift fan when I'm not. But I would say, tell me about why you love Taylor Swift. What do you love about her? What do you think about her relationship with, Kelsey? What do you think about her politics? Personally, I don't, I'm not trying to diss anybody, but I don't really care about Taylor Swift, So I would have to sort of leverage my intellectual curiosity, which is genuine, to know like, hey, why are you so interested? What do you like about that person? So I like people to be iconoclastic and individuals. I like quirky people who stand out. The bland kind of bores me, but the ability to be socially adaptable and the ability to be flexible is a trait that's good for just about anybody.
Yeah. And that's so helpful for our daters because we sometimes hear, people going, I'm going into a date with these talking points and I'm going to tell this interesting story because it's about them. But what you're saying is let the conversation play out by itself. And as long as you stay curious, you're not going to run out of things to talk about. And you are going to seem interesting because you're interested.
Exactly.
And it's not about like Taylor Swift. What you're saying is you're interested in your date and why they like Taylor Swift. And I think having that adaptability too, if you're just so focused only on what you bring to the table and your interests, then you miss the opportunity to connect with another person.
Exactly. And just to subtly shade that too, Julie, it's not only that you're interested in your date, but you're interested in the world.
Yeah.
And that is an attractive trait in somebody. If you're like, I don't know anything about Taylor Swift, so explain to me why she's so popular. What does it mean to you? Shows that you're interested in that person and you're also curious about the world. And I find that to be a very attractive trait in a person.
I really like that distinction between like pretending to adapt and be likable versus just be curious.
If we were just to flip this a little bit, because right now we're talking about how do we read other people and how do we engage with them, there's also, we have to take accountability for how we show up too. So how do we show up on dates in a way that makes us seem trustworthy and interesting and also, vulnerable, all of the things that we want to present?
I would think about what you would potentially feel vulnerable about with that person on this date by having done that research, by being your authentic self and making sure, again, I wear my heart on my sleeve. I'm comfortable with being vulnerable. If you're not ready to talk about your grandmother passing, but you're thinking about being vulnerable, but you don't want to burst into tears, you have to be careful about that kind of thing, right? But I think, you want to prepare for any sort of meeting, including a date, but you don't want to be over-prepared where you're stiff. You want to try to be your authentic self and understand that the other side is going to evaluate you as you're evaluating them. So think about your own body language, are you portraying yourself as nervous? Are you running crazy late and you're going to arrive all frazzled? How are you showing up is critical too. So you want to, be your best self and be calm and be open-minded. And candor is another big one for me. Having lived in China where candor is not prized and being a candid New Yorker, I value candor big time. So I look for that in somebody.
That's so funny because I feel like my relatives are extremely candid. They're a little too honest sometimes, but maybe not to people outside their family.
Yeah. I found in China, no one would tell me no. And I was just like pulling my hair out.
Interesting.
I guess from all of this, there's so many things we learned in this. Before we go into takeaways, what's one maybe actionable, tangible item that someone can do today to date like a spy?
I've thought about elicitation and sometimes people go out on a date and they want to know if the other person wants to have kids. That seems like a big thing, right? So I always thought elicitation is a great way to suss out some of the deeper questions on a date that might feel uncomfortable to ask very directly in the first couple dates. First couple of dates, you want to get to know somebody, see if you have rapport, a connection. But maybe, you're at a time in your life where you really want to make sure that you're, investing time with someone who has the same goals for being a parent or not being a parent. So if you're out with somebody and you want to understand how they feel about children, if you're like, I was with my sister's kids yesterday, she's got another baby on the way. If they respond and go, boy, even holding a baby makes me feel squeamish, or it's like, oh, that's so great. I love kids. Like, I'm from a big family. I can't wait to have children. You didn't ask anybody a question there. You just put out a statement and you elicited a response. And there's all sorts of tactics and triggers for elicitation in my book and in my talks. So if your readers check that out, they can find a lot of different ways to elicit information. And I think that's one of the most powerful tools in dating that can be used, subtly collecting information rather than asking something very directly.
I love that. I think that's something we hear all the time from daters, that they're like, I want to know if this person is relationship ready. So I ask them, do you want a relationship? And that doesn't actually get to the root of what you actually want and how ready they are or anything. So having more of this elicitation approach is really helpful.
I'm glad that connects.
I mean, there's so many takeaways from this. I think first and foremost, my perception of spies has changed from maybe. And I was thinking too, some of it, you have this perception of manipulation and trying to that could correlate to pickup or icky behaviors in dating. But really at the root of what you talked about was understanding humans and motivations and behaviors and connection, which is ultimately what we are trying to do in dating. So I think so much of this is applicable. You are absolutely right that there is a connection here. I think the other big thing is it really got to the root of some of the major issues that we're seeing come up in dating. One, that we can't establish emotional connections on dates. We hear people that just churn through dates and they always get that dreaded text of, there wasn't an emotional connection. You gave us so many tools today to establish emotional connection. So everyone should go back and rewind that. I think another big one that we hear all the time is that I meet someone I really like and I get ahead of myself. I imagine the future with them, but just taking that step back and observing and asking and, having the right discretion and what you were just talking about of not necessarily asking the direct questions, but seeing how they react to different topics. All of that will help you stay in the present and not in your head about who you want this person to be, but rather let them show you who they actually are. And then last, I think the building trust piece is clearly so paramount to relationships. I think there's small things that we can do. We hear of, just responding to texts frequently or, making plans and following through. All of that builds trust. So remembering that is so core to human connection when you have the opportunity to either build trust or break trust, and it is someone you actually want to pursue a relationship with, how do you always lean into those actions that will build it?
Well said.
Wonderful. And also, I'm just learning Mr. and Mrs. Smith is a crock of shit. There are no spies operate like that.
Amongst the many.
They draw too much attention to themselves. They're not adaptable at all. But I think it's important to make this point. The reason for us to bring you on this show today is not for people to go out and look for deception, look for red flags, look for people who are bad. We're not here to catch criminals. But what is so profound about what we learned from you today, Jeremy, is looking for opportunities for connection on dates. And that's all we ultimately want in dating is how do we connect better and deeper with the people we are spending time with. So even your example of looking at the baseline behaviors and seeing if anything is sort of an outlier, that's an opportunity to connect. I realized, that made you uncomfortable. What was it about that conversation or that topic made you uncomfortable? Did that make you anxious? I want to learn more. I want to understand. That's an element of connection. Mirroring and active listening, those are all opportunities for us to connect. I hope all of our listeners will take away from this is now you've gained this new set of skills to help you connect deeper and better with people and stop trying to look for criminals, because leave that to the pros. So, Jeremy, if people want to learn more about you and your book, where can they find that?
Thanks so much. The book is available where all books are available online, some stores and all that, but Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all that stuff. I encourage you to also buy from your small local bookseller. I always like to plug that. but it's widely available. You can find me at sellikespy.net if you want to learn more about me. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, Twitter with the same name too. And I would love to hear from anybody, especially if you buy the book and you apply it to the dating world. I think there's a ton that we covered today and even more in there as well. So I'm so grateful to you guys for having me on the show. It was a really fun conversation.
We are grateful to you too, and we will link that in the show notes for anyone that wants to find Jeremy.
And once you find Jeremy, you can also find our website, dateablepodcast.com. And while you're there, why don't you pre-order our book, How to Be Dateable, coming out in January of 2025.
To each other. Sell Like a Spy and How to Be Dateable.
If you had these two books on your coffee table, you're going to just have all kinds of people asking you all kinds of questions. It's the perfect combo.
I think the CIA should be buying large quantities of both.
You are so correct on that. We're going to quote you. We have that on record. You can pre-order our book right now. And in the meantime, why don't you also give us a rating and review in Apple Podcasts, 5 stars. And in the body of your review, tell us one tactic you took away from this conversation today. Is it active listening? Is it mirroring? Is it elicitation? What is the one tactic you took away today that you're going to start applying on your dates? We love to hear that. So wrapping up this episode, stay dateable.